Hello, and welcome to our fifth edition of Who Knew. Today, resident Ann Archer will be interviewing Tower resident Betty Dementi, an American citizen born in Sweden who came to Richmond as a child in the 1930s. Betty attended St. Catherine's School and Vassar College. She is still active in the affairs of the flourishing Dementi Studio and Photographic Archives. Betty will tell us what it was like to be a foreigner in Richmond during the war and regale us with adventures in the Peace Corps in Africa after her retirement. During this program, you may call extension 6319 with any questions that you may have for Betty. Jessica Corbett will answer the call and will then text the question to me to relay to Betty at the end of the interview. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ann and Betty.
Hello, Betty.
Good afternoon, Ann. How are you? I thank you for my promotions as they turned up in the
In the tales?
Tales, yes. However, they really weren't earned. I was only a student at Vassar, at St. Catherine's.
You were a teacher in Botswana.
I was a teacher in Botswana. That's indeed the case. And in Chesterfield County. So,
Betty, tell us how a little girl from Sweden ended up in Richmond, the capital of the tobacco world.
thereby hangs a tale. In the 1920s, Sweden experimented with socialized medicine, and they made a terrible discovery. You had to pay for it. So they created two government monopolies, a monopoly on the manufacture and the sale of tobacco, and the same for liquor. That, of course, was to produce the monies for the health care services and so on. At that time, everybody in Stockholm knew that all tobacco grew in Virginia. And so they looked at a map of Virginia and found that Lynchburg was right dead center. So we were dispatched from Sweden and came to Virginia, where, of course, for the first thing we discovered was that all tobacco did not grow in Virginia. And also that Lynchburg was at the time a very rural area with one train in the morning and one train in the evening, and certainly was not conducive for traveling. So we moved to Richmond very rapidly and became Richmonders at the capital of the Confederacy and so on. My father spent the next 50 years buying tobacco throughout the States and in Mexico, Brazil, Cuba,
Turkey.
And Greece and Turkey as well. So that.
Tell us the story of the 37 freighters.
Of the pardon?
Of the 37 freighters that your father got safely.
Oh, for goodness sake, freighters. Oh, yes, I'm very sorry. But yes. During the war years, my father was very fortunate. He was able to dispatch 37 freighters with tobacco, medicines, and other matters to Sweden, and every last one of them got through, which was quite remarkable at that particular time. But it was because his father had been a sea captain of sailing ships, and Daddy used the sailing ship traffic lanes to get his ships home. It was dangerous business, but the whole matter was dangerous at the time, and I guess the captains felt one danger was no worse than the next, but they made it, every last one of them.
That's an amazing story.
Which was really very, very nice indeed.
What was it like to be part of a family from, as you say, Northern Europe in Richmond during the war?
It was not a great deal of fun. Somehow or other, maybe Richmonders didn't have but just so much no notion of geography, because when we said, if you say you came from Sweden, it's amazing how many people would ask you about the Alps. So maybe other misunderstandings existed as well. Uh,
But you
when-
were considered spies.
Yes, well, we came from Northern Europe. You can tell that Germany is Northern Europe, so therefore everybody so involved must also be that as well. There were various things that happened. For instance, Richmond had not had an FBI office before this particular occasion. But they all of a sudden turned up in Richmond and had an office on the 19th floor of the Central National Bank building. My father's office was on the 18th floor of the Central National Bank building. I early on realized that our telephone didn't sound exactly the way everybody else's telephones did, and so on. So we were people had their doubts, and I don't suppose there was much of anything to correct the idea. On top of everything else, my mother was a Finlander, and before World War II, Finland and Russia were at war. And that meant, of course, that Finland was fighting an ally of the United States, so that didn't help matters one bit, sort of things. So I went to St. Catherine's, and apparently somebody had started the rumors or what have you, and I was actually booed and jeered off the lower school playground.
And how old were you probably at that point? 8 years old?
6 or 7, 8, yes. 7, I would imagine, yes, something of the nature. And I decided to go home. Home was Windsor Farms. We had been forbidden to walk on Carey Street. It was considered dangerous. So therefore, I went down Grove and walked up to Carey to look over to see whether I had gotten to Windsor Farms yet. It took a long time. Several hours. By the time I got home, there was a welcoming committee. The headmistress of St. Catherine's, Ms. Brackett, was, of course, there. Also, the Richmond City Police, the state police, various officers from heaven knows what, including the governor's office and what have you. It was quite a welcome. I received a landmark spanking for having been so disruptive of life in general. So that took care of that. However, 2 years later, a minister was giving a talk at school, and I'm sure he was using this as an example of something that one did not say or do. But in all events, he announced that all Swedes were stupid. I got up and I left school. I went all the way home. That time, there wasn't a welcoming committee. There was Mrs. Brackett from St. Catherine's, and there was Mother. And I did not get a spanking.
Good.
So that helped considerably. Oh, it sounds as if Richmonders were very unkind. I guess they were simply part of what was going on in the world and so on. And please, may I stick in another story?
By all means.
To showing that Richmonders can be quite the opposite. My younger brother was born without a right hand. It's hereditary and so on. But as a little boy, when you went downtown or went around with him and so on, people would very strangely stop and say, "Little boy, what happened to your hand?" And it was somewhat difficult. Pictures of the two of us when we were children, I'm always holding that hand. I didn't want anybody else to see it, so that was what happened. But one day we were coming out in Milton Roads, and somebody stopped us and said, "Little boy, what happened to your hand?" I don't know how we got by and so on. But then a gentleman came up to Mother and said, may I suggest to the little boy that when somebody says something like that, he should say, "The alligator at the Jefferson got it." And Rick did use that for years, and it was perfect. So there was a very kind side to Richmond as well.
Indeed. Your later years at St. Catherine's, once you got to the upper school, were things different? And
Oh, by that time, yes. And of course, as
what sent you from St. Catherine's to the state of New York to Vassar College?
whomever it was who was head of St. Catherine's College Advisory Committee and so on, mother and father knew nothing about what college to go to or anything. And they said, well, tell us what to do. And Mrs. Chamberlain, I think her name was, Mrs. Chamberlain had graduated from Vassar. So I went to Vassar. I had no other reason for doing so.
I know two things from your Vassar life. I know nothing about what you studied, but I know that you learned how to wait tables at Vassar.
Yes.
And I know that you were in the same dorm with Jackie Kennedy.
Yes, well, the second one we'll forget about. But before the wars, Vassar had maids to take care of serving in the dining rooms and so on. But with the war, there were no such persons to hire, and they decided the thing to do was that we had to do our waiting on tables. So everybody had 3 meals a week that you served. But they decided that it was not just serving, you had to learn how to do it. So we all had a course in table waiting, which has sort of stuck with one all its life. And when you see things not properly done, you react.
Well, little did you know you were going to Vassar to learn how to wait tables.
No, of course not. But I think it was very nice. I think it was an excellent solution to the.
And
Oh, that's not true. By the time I left, they were beginning to put in cafeteria-style dining. So I suspect it came to an end. I don't know.
sounds familiar.
Yes.
And then how did you get to Oxford from Vassar?
That was. I had a Vassar roommate who was engaged to a Rhodes Scholar. Nancy wanted very much to go and spend a year in Oxford with Dave and so on, but her parents felt that she had to have a chaperone. She had to have somebody with her. So it was suggested. I wrote to the Department of Education, and by gum and golly, I was accepted and had a fantastic year. We had a delightful time as that, and I've always enjoyed having that. And by gum and golly, when I became a teacher in the British Empire many years later, they were astounded to find somebody with an Oxford certificate.
I bet they were.
It was all rather fun.
Now, another question. Tell us your maiden name.
Ekstrom.
How did an Ekstrom become a Dementi?
Well, that's really rather difficult. Not having had many pals as a child, I was afraid of people my own age or what have you. I was cared for by my father's secretary, whose best friend was a receptionist at Dementi Studio. So from a very early age, I was perfectly at home in Dementi Studio. And many years later, I married Robert. And became part of the studio, and thereby hangs another tale. A farm boy from Tuscany in the 1880s came to Richmond. We don't really know why he came to Richmond, but there were already several people from Lucca in Richmond. I,
It
the,
probably wasn't for tobacco.
assuredly not. Uh, uh, oh dear, I forgot what it was.
You were about to talk about how photography started here.
Yes, but I was going to say, it's the Valentine Museum will tell a wonderful story about Italian immigrants in Richmond. And there were immigrants from northern Italy, and there were immigrants from southern Italy, and they did not particularly get on, and the church had to arrange for having two churches for these people, and so on. And I don't remember exactly. I remember there was a major confrontation when it came to putting the flooring in the cathedral. They had to send for somebody, and they turned out to be from southern Italy, which didn't set well with the others. But Valentine Museum will tell you delightful stories about that sort of thing. Tony Dementi came here. He was a farmer. He developed a very successful wholesale greengrocer. He had farm on 9 Mile Road, and I'm told he had one where Sears Roebuck is on Broad Street now, too. But in all events, he grew vegetables, and then he delivered them to grocery stores throughout the Richmond area. He had two sons. The first, and Tony, Antonio thought that he should make a good portrait photographer. The second one, Frank, he thought should become an opera singer. As it happened, neither one of them did that. They both became photographers. Tony Dementi started his photography career by cleaning cabinets for Old Dominion camera shop in about 1910 or something of that sort. He then worked for photographers from Atlanta to Georgia for several years, and then came back to Richmond and joined W.W. Foster. Foster was a portrait painter from Norfolk who came here in 1881 and established a photographic studio. Now, he was interested in portraiture, but when he hired Mr. Dementi did the commercial work, the factories, the railroads, and so on. He also, they flourished for quite some time together until Mr. Foster's daughter married another photographer, at which point Mr. Dementi figured that it was time to leave. He not only left, but Walter Washington Foster. Isn't it a lovely name? Walter Washington Foster set him up in business of his own. Over the years, he eventually had a portrait photographer join him, Mr. Ferris. And in the course of time, his very much younger brother, Frank, joined him as well. Frank Tony had become the photographer for the Richmond Times-Dispatch news leader. And Frank took that over, and he made it his own in the course of time. Eventually, Frank left Dementi and established his own studio. And as time further went on, and Foster's studio was coming to an end, we absorbed it back and became Dementi Foster. The interesting part of that is that we have kept negatives. They go back to 1881. The oldest ones I gave to the Virginia Historical Society several years ago, but for the rest, they ought to be there. If you have a great-great-uncle, it's conceivable that in the Dementi or the Foster files we have the negatives and can print them again. Oh,
And oh yes, show some pictures.
I was going to say, well, I should have said that my husband joined his father. Oh, but have we time? Have I? Thereby hangs another tale. Robert graduated from Washington Lee in 1941, which you can figure meant that his entire class left graduation and set off to the armed services. Robert went the rounds of the services and was turned down by them all because of his eyes of all peculiar things, but so he was. However, somebody, somewhere, remembered his application, and he received a letter, an official letter, requiring him to turn up in Norfolk on such and such a date. Well, he went there and found a nascent metallurgical laboratory. There were a couple of Quonset huts. There was a lot of equipment. There were 2 young ladies and a couple of sailors. And he was told that this was his metallurgical laboratory. Robert was somewhat surprised by this. He set the sailors to unpacking the equipment and the young ladies to reading the instruction books. And he went off to explain to the Navy that photography and metallurgy were not synonymous. The Navy was not impressed and said that he should become a metallurgist, which in the course of time he did.
Wow.
Which is very interesting. He spent the war years testing the metal hulls of the ships in Norfolk.
In the shipyards.
In the shipyards, yes. So after the war, he came back and joined his father and became the portrait photographer for a Dementi studio. So.
I think you have some books with some pictures.
Yes, I was going. Right. Robert became ill, and I, who am not a photographer and not a businesswoman, had to learn how to run a studio, which I did with Robert's instruction from bed to telephone to what have you. However, we printed a couple of books celebrating all of the magnificent pictures that Dementi Studio have. Here is Celebrate Richmond, and the other is the Celebrate Richmond theaters, which are pictures. You've seen many, many of these pictures. This one is particularly well known. It's the Triple Crossing, and it shows the 3 train lines all arriving at the same time. That was not by accident. It took a good deal of doing and 3 railroads to agree to do that. But that is one of, and of course, Granddaddy's pictures, Mr. Dementi's pictures of the Monument Avenue photographs are always very well known. Frank Dementi, oh no, excuse me. All right. Frank Dementi spent most of his life with the news media, one way or the other. And just 2 weeks ago, his sons have printed a book of his news photographers. It's called Where the Music Was Playing. Frank had tremendous personality, and he became friends with everybody, including Churchill and Eisenhower and what have you. When he took pictures, he became friends. Here is a picture of Clementine Roosevelt. Excuse me, Clementine Churchill. And that is a lot of fun as well. Right.
Now, the studio is still there on Grace Street?
Yes, it's still there, and we still have our a young man, Dave Miller, is a crackerjack photographer, and to my amazement, is doing very well, considering the time and the era.
And your family still owns the building?
Yes, right.
There's a resident here
Frank.
who teases in public, yes, Frank, who talks about having lived with Betty.
For 20-some years, yes, he did. He had one of the apartments in the Dementi studio.
And he loves telling
Yeah,
the story.
He enjoys that thoroughly, yes, which is a great deal of fun. So, when it came time to go to consider my son for the future of the studio, I thought it was best that I disappear. I didn't want to be being a heavy hand sort of thing. And so I applied to the Peace Corps and spent time very happily in Botswana in southern Africa. Most of the countries in Africa were created by the colonization in the colonies. And when they were creating colonies and so on, they made no attempt to put friends together. So many African companies are made up of tribes who have been warring with one another from the beginning of time. And it is part of the reason there are so many difficulties. Botswana is different. The term Botswana means Bot, all, and Swana is the name of the tribe. This is one tribe. They're all there. And it is a very happy and successful country indeed. They decided that excuse me, I should start with this. When the Boers in the late 1800s began moving up the country from South Africa and so on, the people in Botswana became somewhat concerned, and they decided that they needed some assistance, some help, some aid, or what have you. And they sent a deputation to Queen Victoria, and the stories of that trip are really quite delightful. However, the result was that Botswana became not a colony of the British Empire, but a protectorate. And they were protected and were very successful. In the course of time, the major occupation in Botswana is cattle farming. And today, when I was there, the cattle from Botswana fed Europe. And furthermore, you could also, one could taste the difference, that it was just that. On top of having a successful business in cattle raising, a diamond mine was found, and Botswana has been successful financially and so on. Schools, they have medical clinics throughout the country, and everybody goes to school. They also decided that it was not likely that the world wanted to speak Tswana, so they'd better speak something else. Thereby, elementary school up to the 5th grade is taught in Tswana. From that point on, everything is English, and all government announcements are in English and so on. So the country does remarkably well.
And while you were there, who were you teaching and what?
I was teaching English to seniors.
To seniors.
Yes, sort of thing. That. Mm-hmm.
Was it from St. Catherine's or from Oxford or from Botswana that you became such an avid grammarian?
I have no idea.
Because you certainly...
Yes, unfortunately, it's making life very difficult these days. it, it's hard to find something that doesn't have some grammatical oddities in it, which probably are no longer oddities.
Probably. But they can annoy you.
Yes, they can indeed.
So,
So,
are we getting questions?
We do. You've answered a couple of them in the conversations that you've already had. But one question is, with the last name of Dementi and Dementi Studios being so prevalent in Richmond, did you find that a lot of people would stop you and ask you about the studios when they found out who you were?
oh, assuredly. Yes, indeed. Oh, it's really very, very interesting that Dementi Studio has had the good fortune to collect as many items of its history as it has.
Do you feel like because you were a Dementi, you were fortunate to meet folks that you may not have met otherwise?
Assuredly. Of the the persons who came to be photographed in itself was frequently very, very interesting. And of course, so often we did the General Assembly and the government and so on, and that was always very interesting. So all sorts of people came to visit us one way or another.
Is there anyone that you were particularly excited to meet when you found out that you all would be photographing
Gracious,
them?
I have no idea. Oh, maybe Tom Wolfe, who wrote the introduction to Celebrate Richmond. That perhaps was most thrilling one for me. So,
In his white suit?
yes.
Well, now, here we go. Another question just came in. What was the tobacco company that sent your family to America?
The government.
So it was the Swedish government.
My father's position was that of a diplomat. He had a diplomatic passport and was considered that at all times.
Now, you touched a little bit on how you felt like you all were being spied on, or
Yes.
folks thought maybe you were spies. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those experiences?
Gracious, well, I think I've sort of wrapped the no, it was, people would whisper and so on and poke one another when you turned around and so on.
Tell about the summer camp that you were sent to during the war.
Well, that's a curious business. We were not the only people who found it was difficult, or rather my parents did found it was not, they weren't the only ones who found it was difficult to bring up children in the wartime U.S. and so on. And a Dr. and Mrs. Bush from Philadelphia bought a farm on the coast of Maine and created a summer camp for the children of diplomats in Washington. We were an odd crew. We were of all ages, of all ethnicities, of all nationalities from around the world. And so we spent the summer having a glorious time on the coast of Maine, which is a wonderful place to be in the summertime, and so on. So,
And quite a different, different from Richmond, Virginia.
very, very different. Yes, because everybody spoke a different language, we were all required to speak French. Whether you liked it or knew anything French or not, there was somebody always there who could help you or correct you and so on. And that did very nicely, too.
And that's how you ended up in my French class.
Yes, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
Indirectly.
All right, another question. Did you ever go back to Sweden during your childhood, or did you all stay?
Oh, yeah, we went back every summer until 1938 was the last turn. Did I mention the Hindenburg? No.
No.
All right, well, we would leave in May and come back in September. And since in those days it took 13 days to cross the Atlantic, they were really very, very delightful summers and so on. However, in 1938, Daddy put us on the Grips home and in New York one May day. Did I say 38? It's 37. And while on the pier, everyone was aware of the fact that the von Hindenburg, which was a great gas balloon from Germany, which had come to this country, was circling Manhattan, and it did indeed do just that. We went on board ship. The ship left the harbor and headed down the Sound, down by Long Island and so on. And the von Hindenburg went to New Jersey to dock, if that's what airships do, I don't know. And as you perhaps remember, it burst into flames. And there was a news reporter who made a very famous report as he was watching this thing blow up. Well, down the Sound, I will have you know, the sky of all over New York and New Jersey turned scarlet. It wasn't yellow, it was really scarlet sort of thing. And we were standing on deck, and my mother burst into tears. Well, of course, we'd left Daddy on the pier, and it looked as if the entire world there was up in flames. And perhaps I wouldn't have remembered it if she hadn't turned into tears. But that was quite something. In the course of time, we just did learn what went on, and so on. But that was quite something to have seen.
Oh, I bet it was.
Now, this is just a little bit from the inside scoop that I have from chatting with you, but a story that I thought you might like to share about your time in kindergarten at St. Catherine's from your reading.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That wasn't at St. Catherine's. That's what produced St. Catherine's. When we first arrived in Richmond, it was the 1st of September, and I think school started immediately, what have you. Mother took me to Albert H. Hill School, which was the one that was closest to us, and so on, and left me, presumably in the kindergarten or what have you, and she was told to come back at 12 o'clock. Well, she did, and they had lost me. They didn't know where I was to be found. Well, what had happened was that I had gotten into the kindergarten, and they discovered I could read first grade material. So I got promoted, and in the first grade they discovered I could read second grade material, and so I was promoted. Eventually, of course, they found me. And Mother was, of course, very proud of this magnificent child of hers who was so brilliant. However, very shortly, it became obvious that I'd never heard of subtraction. I couldn't write my name, and I didn't know anything else that I was supposed to know at that time. And that's how St. Catherine's came about. It was decided that they would send me there to correct all these things that hadn't happened. So...
Well, it's pretty fascinating how you learned to read.
Well, yes. Well, I've learned to read because we traveled nonstop my early years, and I was always in somebody's lap, and they were reading to me, and it didn't bother me whether it was one language or the other. It was simply being read to nonstop, and that is the easiest and the best and the nicest way to teach a child how to read. It works.
And I think anybody who sees you anywhere in the halls here at Westminster Canterbury knows you are reading a book, carrying or reading a book.
That's very nice.
And we've actually had another question come in. They would like for you to tell about your wedding and your personal life, and if you went back to Sweden for your wedding.
No, we did not. We went to Bermuda.
Oh,
Very exciting sort of thing. No, I was married here in my husband's church, First English Lutheran Church. Uh, since Swedes are automatically, whether they like it or not, Lutherans, members of the Lutheran Church, it's part of the citizenship. I also was a Lutheran, and we were married there and traveled to. Uh, 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 no, since I have not been back. Uh, 19, oh, well, 80s was the last time that I went home. And the trouble being that my nieces and nephews have all gotten very elderly and really truly aren't that interested in an old lady aunt or what have you. So I really have no family immediately in Sweden anymore.
But you-
Better in Finland, but I haven't managed to do that.
you still have a lot of family in Richmond, though. You want to tell us about that?
No, I have no family. Oh, excuse me, the Dementi family is yes. Wayne Dementi, I'm sure many of you know, and he is the printer of this book, and his brother Brian and his wife are the authors of this book, and so on. My son and daughter graduated from St. Catherine's and St. Christopher's and went to Washington Lee and to Yale. But Margaret now lives in Seattle, and she is sheltering on an island in the Sound, which sounds really awfully nice to be able to do that. And my son lives in Roanoke, where he has a studio. Right.
Wonderful.
You mentioned the word knighthood yesterday.
Yes, because of Daddy's 37 ships that made it home, the King of Sweden awarded him with a knighthood, which was most delightful. So.
There are other famous people in your family background on the Finnish side?
No.
Or somebody who crossed.
I was going to say, my grandfather was accused of having shot the Russian Governor General of Finland, which he did not do, and he had to flee. But that was normal Russian behavior at the time. That sort of things. No, you possibly, if we have time, I have another tale. My Daddy's getting all these ships home by using the sailing lanes was because of his father. His father, as a young man in the middle of the 1800s, lived in a fishing, farming community, and his mother was widowed, and she decided the thing to do was to sell the land and move to Stockholm, which she did. She bought one of the dreadful yellow buildings that you always see. When you see pictures of Stockholm, you see along the shoreline there, these yellow apartment buildings. She bought one of those. But my grandfather was very much upset. He, of course, thought he would have inherited the land and so on. So he ran away, and he ran away to the Labrador Banks and learned seamanship from the whalers there. In the course of time, he felt he wanted to apply for captain's papers. However, a peasant boy in Sweden in the mid-1800s knocking on the door of an elite occupation probably would have had some difficulty. So he took his captain's papers in Boston and sailed thereafter from Baltimore on one of the last clipper ships that left the harbor there. They went around the bottom of South America and across the Pacific. And this is a good story. They were shipwrecked uh, on an island and so on. In the course of time, a ship came by. It was a Swedish ship and rescued them. On the way home, they stopped in New Zealand, where grandfather got his quit papers from the American company for whom he'd been sailing. And I have those papers. It's most amazing that he was, having been shipwrecked, he was free of any obligation to the company for which he had been sailing and so on. And he returned with the saving ship to Sweden and had a quite illustrious career as a sailing ship captain, and he was on board when they moved to motor ships, and he ended up with motor ships and so on. But that's how Father got the travel lanes that his tobacco ships used in the war.
What a
fun.
family.
It's fun.
This has been lovely, and your stories, I know you have so many more to share, and I do hope that other residents or staff members that may pass you in the hall might ask you for more. I know I'm looking forward to learning more
Thank you.
in the coming days and weeks and months, so
Thank you so very much. I'm sure all of us have equally interesting stories.
And we're going to continue this program. We're going on next month, a month from today, March 17th. Joan Murphy is going to interview Reverend Al Reiners about the Reiners years at a mission church living among indigenous Eskimos in northwest Alaska above the Arctic Circle.
Got it. Great.
Thank you, Betty.
Lots
Thank you.
to look forward to, but thank you both. This has been a very enlightening afternoon, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in.